understand that many Albertans are frustrated and angry, and part of that anger involves Alberta not receiving a fair deal from the federal government and some other provinces. We hear your frustration. Even many Albertans who wholeheartedly support many in Canada want to see significant reforms that will allow the province to develop its resources and have a larger voice in the Federation. And we are here to listen. The panel has been provided with a series of possible options for further examination, some of which have been proposed before, but it is not limited to those ideas. The panel will be looking at all ideas and encouraging Albertans to share their thoughts. The panel has been conducting a number of public engagements, consulting with the experts, and undertaking other research on how to best to define and secure a fair deal for Alberta. The panel will also look at how best to advance Alberta's vital economic interests, such as construction of energy pipelines. The goal of the Fair Deal panel is to develop a report outlining what was heard during these engagement processes, as well as providing the Premier with recommendations for further actions that the province can take. This work will be concluded by March 31st. The Government of Alberta will then review the recommendations and put forward a plan of the panel's works. It is the panel's understanding that most major policy changes that were not included in the government's platform but are worthwhile to explore will be shared with Albertans for endorsement in a future referendum. Now, just to address a couple of things, fire exits here, here, and here. Washrooms are straight at the back. And let's keep going here. So the Fair Deal panel wishes to hear from you and your perspectives on Alberta's place in Federation. So the panel would like to pose 3 questions that are actually on your white papers there. Do you think Alberta is getting a fair deal in the Federation? If not, what would a fair deal for Alberta look like? What should the provincial government do to secure a fair deal for Alberta? And at this time, we encourage you to come up to the mic and share your stories of how this is impacting you and suggestions. We're not going to do the number system, so just as soon as firstly, we are here to listen and to share. We're here to understand, but not debate. Respect and courtesy are very important. Participants will have about 2 minutes to come up to the mic and share their message, their story with our panel. And also, we'll be filming this event, so it is being recorded, and the reason for that is that the panel will have access to it to make sure we have all your input on it. So with that, we're just going to start and we're going to listen to what you have to share today. Thank you. Hopefully the mic is on. Just going to check if the mic's on. Yes.
Well,
Thanks a lot.
I could probably go on for about an hour, but there was only 2 people that drew a number, so maybe I'll go on a little longer than 2 minutes. My name's Graham Anderson. I live down near the river, and so I've been a lifelong Albertan. I remember Stephen's dad. My grandmother was a supporter of his in about 1968. I remember we had a big orange and blue poster of his from the 71 election. So, but I find it annoying, and then I had in 1981 on October 4th, I borrowed $115,000 to buy a seismic operation. And because we had sold the cows, so I needed something to do in the wintertime, and I'd worked a couple winters. But on October 4th, I paid for the rig in Calgary. And on October 6th, Dad Trudeau came out with national energy policy, and this place came to a screeching halt. So when I saw Stephen here, it kind of reminded me of that story. But we've been through, my family was a little bit political, so we've been through all this stuff. We watched the news. There was just such a general, I don't want to use the word hatred, but it was close to that for Dad Trudeau. And we've been through this whole thing my whole life, and I'm 59 years old. Nothing has changed. All we were lucky to have that, the prosperity of a few good oil cycles, but we've given that $600 billion to Ottawa. And for the MLAs, that would be nice to kind of have that right now. because you guys we're going in debt, and Ontario is the biggest non-state debt in the world. This place is crazy. We're never going to be able to do anything with Ottawa because of two things. There's the 200 federal seats in Ontario, Quebec, and Stephen Harper was pro-Western, pro-business, pro-conservative, pro-law and order, all this stuff. He did a great job with the two minority governments and the majority government he had. But through all that, with that big majority government, he's still facing that political reality that the numbers just don't work for us. They don't work in Western Canada. So traditionally, like throughout history, 2/3 of Alberta and Saskatchewan always votes Conservative. 2/3 of the rest of the country always votes center or left. And we can't get around that map. There's no Senate. Even the 13 states, when they started in the 1700s, the little states knew they're going to be bowled over by the big states, the big populous states, so they had a Senate. I'm not a political scientist, but apparently there's some better models that Australia and New Zealand have, but we are never going to get around that math of the big thing in central Canada. The other thing, that math is pretty easy, the number of seats in central Canada, but here's the other thing. Alberta has 130,000 people per federal seat. Quebec has 105 or 109. So our vote is only worth 84% of the Quebecers. Can you imagine, ladies, disabled people, religious or cultural minorities, tell them that your vote is only worth 84% of the mainstream. There'd be riots. That's the good news. The rest of the country, do the math on the rest of the country, it gets worse. And Albertans' vote is worth 30% of what a person from PEI is worth. And in general, in the Maritimes, our federal vote is only worth about 40 or 50% of what a Maritimers' vote is. And that's, anyways, I could go on for that for hours. Equalization, nothing is crazy. I'm an employer in Calgary, so the smartest politician or bureaucrat ever was the guy that hit the payroll tax. Because then everybody opens their checkbooks of their take-home pay. So that sort of the tax you pay is a little bit buried. So the same thing with that equalization. It's so buried in these vague, abstract, somewhat conceptual ideas. The average, these guys in this room probably all know what equalization is about. The average person on the street couldn't tell you what's the difference between equalization and fiscal stabilization. And if every man, woman, and child in Alberta, or every household in Alberta had to sit at the kitchen table and send a check to the Quebec Treasury for $6,000, you guys, it would get fixed in a week.
Thank you so much for your input. We'll have to cut you off there.
Can I have one more time?
I'd like to hear him speak.
Okay.
So I didn't make this sentence up, but here's what your referendum, Jason can't wait for 20 more months. Here's the sentence that the referendum should say. Do you want to be controlled politically and economically by the Laurentian elites forever? Yes or no? That's what the referendum has to say.
Okay, the mic is open. Oh, and your MP, Martin Shields, has joined us at the back here.
Hey, Martin.
All right, the mic is open. We'd love to hear from you.
Hi, Penny Creswell. I've lived in Langdon for almost 24 years now, and born and raised in Calgary. My parents were raised around Elmora region. I find one of the things with what they need to do for fixing things, we need way more seats added here, or they need seats taken away. The BC and Alberta combined have, I think, an equal number or more seats than Quebec, but they have over double of what we have combined. So that definitely, the seating numbers have to be changed with, yeah, at one time, maybe it was more fair to the numbers, but the numbers have changed, and the seats have not. One thing I find besides energy for pipelines need to go through, smarter energies for green energies have to be smarter too. All these, I know I've heard complaints from farmers and stuff that I know down south about these windmills going in. And windmills and solar are intermittent, they are not sustainable, they are subsidized, they are high costing. Nuclear energy, I've done a lot of research the last few months on different types of energy. And it's not like Chernobyl, the nuclear energy is very safe and very cheap. And it's not much of a footprint on your land, and it doesn't kill birds, bees, and bats by blades. So I think we need to look at more different ways and say there is other energies, like we're still shoveling garbage and piling it up and digging holes, when we could build something to incinerate it and take the energy from the incinerated and use it for the heat and the energy for greenhouses, for food.
Great, thank
That's
you
fine.
so much. So big.
If there's no, maybe I can stimulate something. Can everybody hear me? Yep. Without the mic? Oh, okay, because you're recording. So we've been going through, I'll get on one or two, and then Donna can get on one or two others, and just kind of get your input, even show of hands stuff. So we've been given a large number of topics. Originally, if you had read the mandate letter, everything from the pension plan, taxes, personal and federal taxes, looking at policing, rural police in particular, the RCMP, and a chief firearms officer appointed by law. So we can go through those. Get it closer, sorry. So recording, but now you can hear me. Okay. And some of these things are pretty complex. So we're looking deeply into the Canadian pension plan, for instance, an Alberta pension plan. Some of you may have read some elements about it. The demographics work very well for us, but also the ability to have those funds managed here may help us attract other foreign funds to invest in projects here. Again, it's very complex because you don't want to have, but in any pension environment, you want to spread your investments all around the world so they're safe. That would certainly be what we'd be doing if we recommended that. But I'd kind of like to get a sense of, from even the audience, show of hands, is that a good idea to look at setting up, maybe with Saskatchewan, our own pension plan, separate from the federal pension plan? And that's a large amount of additional funding. It's about $2+ billion a year more that would be coming into Alberta, and would have a lot of weight. So, any sense in the room, a good idea or a bad idea? So, good idea, fairly. Anybody wants to talk on that subject or make any comments on what we should be doing in the pension area? Not yet.
Is it not true that we actually, percentage-wise, Alberta's amount into the CPP is actually higher than most of everybody else in Canada?
Well, it partly relates to the demographics and also the fact that, so we have a younger population, so we're paying in the same amount per person roughly, but that's shared around. It's the same with unemployment insurance, where Alberta's paying quite a bit more and it's collected elsewhere. So there are some imbalances in that. I want to be really clear though, this is a very complex issue, and how to do it and how long it would take. So, we are digging deep into, if we do recommend it, to make sure we recommend that we go very deep and do it well. It would make no sense to do something because you're angry and hurt yourself in the process.
So since we have a younger demographic, if we had our own pension plan, we actually would do better with sharing it with the rest of Canada, right?
I'll go to one more then, and then Anna can take her turn at the mic. If we were to look at, so the issue, and this is something when we go to different, we've been in big cities, everywhere from Lloydminster, Medicine Hat, Fort McMurray, Grand Prairie. So we're very different in each area. Certainly in the big cities, there's really not a concept of rural crime, rural policing, because they have their own police forces. What's the sense here that it makes sense to look at potentially a new approach with the RCMP, or again work with other provinces on opting out and going to provincial police forces or regional police forces? Would that be a good idea to change things, or is the status quo good? So change, who's in favor? Status quo, who's in favor? Okay, there we go. So probably mixed on that one. So that's useful information to collect. So I thank you very much. I actually have one or two more I want to get into here, but I'm going to ask Donna to get up and do her. Yep, sorry.
Can I ask you one question, Stephen? How many provinces presently have? My question is, how many provinces actually have their own police force at present?
Ontario and Quebec. Can you go to the mic? Good. You got it rolling.
Yeah, you started something. So in regards to the police force, those provinces that have their own police force, can the municipalities hold those police forces accountable?
I think that's a key issue, and that's usually the issue we hear is there a lot more local authority on the provincial police forces, or is it all centralized too? So key issue, I think, is a lot more regional and local authority, management, accountability. I think the accountability becomes that big issue, and very much so in Ontario and Quebec, which also have the large cities have their own municipal police forces. So, excellent question. Thank you.
I don't want to hog the mic here, but
Otherwise, I am.
there is already that model, the game wardens right now. So the game wardens, I think there's an academy in Lethbridge, but they all can work if they that they take the course in Lethbridge, and then they do another academy, so they can all work. If you're a game warden, if you take, then you can work in Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, both the territories. So that for policing, there already is sort of a framework model that the West could have, or Alberta and Saskatchewan.
That is an excellent point. Thank you very much. Before I hand over to Donna, one other thing worth noting. We're also looking at not just the points that were given to us, but a whole number of others that have come up in these meetings, i.e. the composition of the Federal Court of Canada. They have to live in Ottawa. In the US and Australia, even in the UK, they're distributed. And that has an impact on where they're recruited from and others. So there are, and those are ideas that have come from people we've talked to in the audience. So again, as you're going through this, are there any other areas that you would like us to dig into or look into on items? We've heard a lot about the national parks, being 97% in the West and run out of Ottawa. So those types of things really get attention. You would be appreciating of the Canada Council. We get a quarter per capita of other provinces.
$2.97 per person per capita versus almost $5 everywhere else. Sorry.
This word there.
Yeah, in the arts, yeah. So
in our province, for any sort of anything in terms of culture, multiculturalism, any sort of arts councils, we're funded at just over $2 per person in this province versus over $4 in any other province per capita. So yeah, it's a huge issue. It's just the way that the funding model has always worked in the past. So that's why we're working with all of our ministers.
I shouldn't do bias, but I'll do bias because of the nature of the room on this one. A part of it, and part of what we're looking at is establishing an Ottawa office and others. I'm in the technology business, so some of the university grants and others tend to be favor. Part of it's because the decisions are made in Ottawa, and the people that are closer have been able to maybe get in those doors. One of the other things I've heard, Leela, is, well, because we're doing so well, and charities are able to raise money, here maybe we shouldn't get our fair share. So, but those are just things we've heard. I'm not saying they're true, but we're digging deep, and I'm going to hand it over now that I've created this. Oh, go ahead.
I've done some reading on, what is it, that similar stuff with, I'm going to get my head, as I say. Since we are being literally ripped off by the rest, well, some parts of Canada, can we not, that right where the courts, you talk about policing. One of the things I've noticed more about the policing is the same criminals, especially rural crime, they're out on 5 or 6 different bails and still not in jail. It's catch and release. So the cops catch them, but the courts release them. As more as what can we do about the courts releasing them again and again and again?
Okay, the mic is open again.
Come on up, Ray. We really appreciate you.
Stephen brought up something about the Supreme Court. If anybody wants just to take 5 minutes on Google, so go on Google and look up our Supreme Court. Now, we're not, a lot of us probably follow American politics, so the Supreme Court comes up every week. Never comes up in Canada. But talk about this Laurentian. Go on the biographies of our Supreme Court people. And if you want to look, University of Toronto, Osgood, McGill, that's where they're from. There's one guy that was born in Burns Lake, and there's a nice blonde lady that she spoke at a convocation, and she's not from Alberta, but I forget her name, she went once to Alberta, so that's our representation, but the rest of it, the whole mentality. The other thing, my oldest daughter's a lawyer, and she's not an aspiring to be on a court, but sometimes she said somewhere in the future, she'd like to maybe be a judge. She can never be a federal judge. Like, as much as we don't like to learn or speak a whole bunch of languages, the reality is out here, we're just never going to speak French well enough for any of our children to be in the high up in our federal bureaucracy or the Supreme Court or a federal judge. So there's so many things. It's like we're so desensitized because the amount of problems the list is so long. Like, which one do you speak about? Anyways, I would love to join Alberta, Saskatchewan, maybe Manitoba. They're like a broken plane in the neutral zone, but they just are. But I would like to cut the thing off. Like, even North America, culturally and everything, it runs north and south. We're far more, I don't know what the word is, but we're far more connected to people, Montana, Texas, whatever. We all go on holidays. I bet we could do a poll in here. The amount of people that have been to the States, Las Vegas, Phoenix, wherever, California, Disneyland, that we don't travel east. We travel north-south, and that's the way our brains work, and that's the way our politics should work. I'm the exception. I'd vote. I'd be a 51st state in a heartbeat, but or separate, but all credit.
I'm kind of loath to speak because we are here to listen to you. This is about your voice. This is not about our voice. We're not coming to you to tell you what to do. You're the last people I would tell what to do. What I'm going to go through is really quickly the list of the 9 items that the Premier put in front of us as a panel. And I'm also going to mention, Stephen's already mentioned, what other people are talking about. And I'm going to sort them because it helps. It helped me understand it. There are legal remedies, there are constitutional remedies, and those have big formulas attached to them. And then there are economic remedies. If you want a roadmap to the economic remedies, you should go read the Premier's speech that he gave at the Manning Center in late November. And this is not a partisan position. That's his roadmap. It's an economic roadmap, and he's driving every economic truck that is available to this province to try to do those things unilaterally and to build collaboration with other provinces. So interprovincial trade barriers, a big thing. That's something, but we can do it. If nobody else does it, we're going to get more frustrated. So you can see a lot of those economic pieces already in place. There are things that we can do unilaterally. We don't need anybody's permission. We just haven't done them. You know, the frustration that, you know, when you hear, why are we not accessing our fair share of grant money, whether it's the arts, whether it's French language, whether it's research and innovation at the universities or in companies, why the hell did we not do it? And I'm as critical as anybody. We got complacent. We were making money. We knew it was a good time, and we just let it go. So we could do those things. An Alberta pension plan is something that we can do. We have the constitutional right to do it, and we have the legal right. It's really complicated. It would mean, like Quebec, we would have our own pension plan. And yes, well, our demographics are younger, well, they remain younger. We would have a lower contribution and have the same payout. So there's a, like, that makes sense. But it's a burden. It's a burden for employers. It makes it a little more complicated to do business here. We can collect our own taxes, which means we would have to set up a system to do that. We would have, you know, we'd have to set up in Alberta an organization that was able to do that. And it wouldn't be Service Alberta, no offense, but it's got to be an organization that has the capacity to do that. That means that we would write the checks. And your comment, Graham, about us writing the checks versus, you know, getting a kick, you know, the money back, it makes a difference. So it would give us control. It wouldn't change the numbers, but we would be writing the check instead of somebody else writing it, waiting for somebody to write the check for us. The Chief Firearms Officer, it's small, but it's meaningful for some people. Instead of Ottawa designating that person, we designate that person. Guys, we need to hear back from you on this. Stephen and I are not deciding here. This is not our role. It's about you. So whether you do it today or you email in later, which you can do at info@fairdeal.ca, we need to hear your voice. We really do. I can't emphasize that enough. We could choose to opt out. Quebec does it. It's in our constitution. We're allowed to do it. So they opt out of a lot of federal programs and say, give me the tax money instead. Healthcare is one where we've been really wrapped hard in the past, and you guys who are old enough to remember the Klein era, I'm also 59, I remember a lot of things. We know we got really wrapped for that. But pharmacare is coming up, and that's a big change in a program. Is that something we should say, no, we're not interested in that. We'll do our own thing. It takes work. It's not easy. Some people will be upset by that. Think it through. We need to decide on these strategies. Another thing that Quebec does, and I go out to Quebec because they're the masters of this. If you're a municipality or a school board or some third level of government in Quebec, you do not negotiate directly with the federal government. You don't get to. You go to the province and you say, Mayor Neshi, negotiating. We are heard, but we don't demand that as much as Quebec does. Should we? That also means that we would have to be more agile. We would have to spend more money on having offices, Alberta representative offices in Texas, in California, in Paris, in the EU, in the UK, in China, fill in the blank. Costs money. You want us doing that? That's a question for you. Policing we've talked about. We do have the right to give notice to the RCMP and say, you know what, thank you, here's your notice. We know we get a little bit of money from the feds for this, 20 and 30% of the cost of that. But we're going to do it by ourselves because you don't fit in with our culture. That's what we're hearing around the province. RCMP do not understand the local culture. And some people don't think they're good at white-collar crime. Other people say, you know, that's another big thing for us to manage. Do we want to? So you need to think about that. Another thing that's in our mandate letter is provincial constitutions. The only province that has one is British Columbia. Frankly, I'm a lawyer and I didn't know that, and I pay attention to this stuff. So is it useful? Some people think it is because it would allow us to embed in our province constitutional right to property rights. There's also a sense that people would like to bind the hand of future governments with respect to things like the Heritage Savings Trust Fund. I think that's a big deal. How do we, can you do that? You can't normally bind a future government. But with the heritage, if you embed it in a constitution, which means you gotta get Ottawa on side, it's a big deal. You could do things like that. These are longer term things, but they are things that could be done. You've mentioned the equalization formula. We all know that takes a lot of work to change, but it is something maybe we should crack open and know it's a long-term game. Some people have talked about the provincial right to claim control over immigration. Back to Quebec. They do it. We can. Tripoli Senate and representation comes up a lot. The big challenge, and I'm going to finish here, is if you increase the numbers for Alberta, by necessity, you would really increase the numbers for Toronto. So it kind of works, but it doesn't. So we still don't have the numbers. And I'm not, that's in a nutshell, and it's not fair to do that. But it's not an easy fix. The last thing I'm going to say, and then I'm not going to talk anymore because I feel like that's not what this is about. We have to figure out a strategy here. There are people who tell us that we should get our elbows down when we get out of Alberta, and we should start to act a little more collaborative and cooperative. And then there are other people who are mad as hell and say, I don't care what you do, but you better do it yesterday. And elbows up to do whatever it takes. This is a big deal, and that is going to be part of our report, is how do we do what we choose to do? Who do you want to be? Who are we? Who do we want to be in Confederation? And how close to the brink of separation are we comfortable going? The tech decision is going to take us really close. We all know that. What do you want to do? What do you honestly want to do? This is all of our decision, and we need to hear from you. So I'm not going to talk anymore. Thanks.
I've heard some really good points, but it all boils down to this. We're culturally different. Out in the West, we're individuals, and that's the most important thing that we have. I don't care about your sex, your religion, or your color, your ethnicity, whatever your background is, it's irrelevant. People come to this part of the world for that freedom. In the East, the collective is important. It's the group. If you fall out of line with that group, you become the pariah, you're ostracized, if you don't have the same mindset. We are free-thinking people out here. Now my family, my ancestors escaped the Nazis and the Soviets. I know all about collectivism. They kill, they rape, they steal if you do not follow their mindset. I am terrified of what's happening in this country. We are in big trouble. We do not belong in Canada anymore. We need the opportunity for self-determination. We are on the cusp. I was blessed to grow up in a community, and for teachers, they're generally very liberal-minded. I was blessed to have a social teacher that escaped Czechoslovakia. He was a kulak. The horrors that he told us. I had a German art teacher who escaped the Nazis. His whole family was obliterated because they stood up to that regime. And you got to remember, the Nazis were socialists. Don't ever forget that. A lot of people will call me a Nazi because I don't stand with the left. I got thick skin, I can eat it. But the truth is, they were socialists. If we want our freedom and self-determination, we have to lead. They have a different mindset over there. I want them to do whatever the heck they want, but for my people here, we have to have self-determination, or we're doomed. Like all these nice policies about having our own pension and police and all the rest of it, I'm behind it. But that's just a little, those are little solutions to a massive problem. That's all I have to say.
Hi there, I'm Tom Aheer. I want to thank you very, very much for coming over here. Appreciate you guys making the effort. The only thing I've found that you get with age is you go through a bunch of this stuff. And what I wanted the panel to take back is, my dates might not be 100% right, but about 2001, Stephen Harper, Ted Horton, Andrew Crooks, Ken Bosco put together the Fireball letter. And that really resonated. We had just come through a bunch of stuff, and there was a lot of, what should we do? Exactly the same thing that's happening now. 2004, Ralph Pine put together a panel doing this exact same thing. Don't remember the name of the panel because that's the other thing about getting old and seeing. But they listened to what and I was of the age that I was involved in that. And I listened to what the people had to say. I heard what the people had to say to the panel. And that report was released in 2004. And everybody here should read what that was. Because everything that's being brought up right now was being brought up right then. And the panel quashed it all because it was difficult. Autonomy costs money. But if you are going to be the king of your castle, you are going to have to spend your money. We have got complacent and said, well, the federal government will do this, the federal government will do that. And what we get with that is we get the federal government telling Alberta Healthcare what they have to do. Healthcare has never, ever been a federal thing. This is all provincial. And I love what Jason's been doing. But I remember there was a multicultural meeting in Calgary. Leela was there, and they were talking about the new multicultural stuff. And the question was asked, well, why are we only talking about 5,500 people that we get to vet when Quebec vets everybody that comes into their province? If you want to immigrate to Quebec, you have to go through a Quebec panel, whereupon anybody can come to Alberta, and we have control over 5,500. And Jason said, that's the way it is. And that is so discouraging. Because we've given up. At that point, you've given up. We have to control our future. And in order to control our future, we have to do what Quebec is doing. We have the blueprint. We're not doing anything different. We just have to do what Quebec is doing. We have to become assertive. We have to say, enough is enough. This is what we're going to do. It's going to cost money, but when you're writing the check, if it costs, I've heard the number, it's going to cost $700 million in order to have your own pension, to collect your own taxes, in order to set up but what's that number? We're sending $21 billion a year down that pipeline. So if we take, the $700 million off the $21 billion, it's a drop in the bucket. We can do this. It's going to be difficult. Some of this stuff sounds scary, pension plans and all that kind of stuff. I'm getting to the age where, I'm probably going to maybe be able to see that. But I'm willing to take a chance, and everybody here has to. We have to control our destiny. It is on us to do that. Thank you.
Hi, Ron Warwick, just a local guy here. So, pensions. I think the big pensions are actually, the root of the problem for a lot of people in Canada and out west. But I also think they're the answer to some of the problems, and I'll just explain myself a bit. Most of the big pensions go back to, governments like CPP. You always hear about that pension plan investing, Ontario teachers, and there are just numerous ones down the line. And even our own RRSPs, which are basically that we all invest in, are basically our own private pensions. The trouble is now these pensions have become so big that they are competing with the average business person. Even as a farmer, we have a farm up in northern Alberta. We had a cold call offer by Canada Pension Plan to buy our farm in northern Alberta. And so you start, and it happens time and time again. The Ontario Teachers Fund have investments in farms in southern Alberta. The good real estate, you just drive down the highway in Strathmore through the main parts of Chestermere where all these shopping malls are now. Well, guess what? They're owned by a pension fund somewhere, right? So, and what do? The first thing they do, run up the price and then run up the rent for the most part, small business people that don't have pensions. That are, and sure, they made us all feel good when they said we can invest, or when they took away the Canadian content of your RRSP, right? And to me, I think that was wrong, right? And I don't know the rules that Canada Pension has or Ontario Teachers or whatever, but they can invest wherever they want. They don't have to invest. And to me, I think that's wrong. They should be forced to take a percentage of that money and invest it. And so this goes back to the pensions will be our savior. Force them to invest in building hospitals, or or the, I don't know how they call it, is it the PP partnerships or whatever? Okay, force these guys to throw it in there. Force the teacher unions to do it. Force us in that. Otherwise it's like, you can use the analogy like, as Canada is one big business, right? How many people, and we're all guilty of it, I'm sure, right? You got a good business, you do what you do well, and you take money and you think you can do better somewhere else, right? And at the end of the day, even if you did do better somewhere else, you weaken your business at home, right? And I think that's exactly what's happening with the, and I don't know when they change that rule, like on the RRSPs and that. I think they need to bring it back. Your milk and honey is raised in Canada. We'll keep a good portion of that pension here. And, I think that would help a lot. Everybody, I know, even talking with Mel Keat one day, right? He's got the gas station in town. Well, if you want to go try and find, the real estate to build a new one, guess what? You're not competing because for the most part, a government or a union pension fund has it scooped up. So it's, so now they're competing against the private sector. I think it's slightly wrong, right? Yeah.
John Bland. Hey, this is a fair deal panel, and I applaud the government and you guys working on it to get a fair deal for Canada, or for Alberta, I'm sorry. There's a lot of things that aren't fair, as we're hearing here today. The one thing I don't think should be part of this discussion is separation from Canada. I'm a nationalist. A lot of people have worked for a long time to make Canada the great country it is. We're all immigrants. Leela's family a little closer than mine, not much. Leela and I share something. My father was born in India. So anyway, I'm a nationalist. I don't think separation is the way to go. You shouldn't threaten something you can't carry out. And any of us that raise kids should know that. Quebec has used this as a tool. Do they want to separate? Of course they don't. They'd be foolish to. For the benefits they get from being part of Canada. We would be so isolated in so many ways. Where we're going to ship everything through, Montana or the North Pole? So on the police thing, I'm an ex-mounted policeman. I'm pro RCMP. This is a little off track. Please don't give the sheriffs any more authority. That's been coming up in rural crime discussions. Sheriffs are a tax on Albertans. Ask anybody that drives 22X on a daily basis. But anyway, work for a fair deal for Alberta. in my opinion, separation should not be part of it. Thank you.
Okay, we are going to continue. I just want to let you know that we just have a half an hour left. So, yeah, time flies. So the mic is open.
Hi, so my name is Gerard Musician. So I guess my question is, or I'll do a little bit of a story here. I had the great opportunity to drive across the country in the 150th, coast to coast and back again. And it seemed to me as I traveled across the country, it was amazing to see the country on the ground as you went through community to community to community. And so, as John pointed out, when you take that in perspective in the history, there's been a lot of work that has been done over the last 150 years. And it's great, it's fantastic. Are we different than the East? You betcha. Every community is different, from one side of the country to the other side of the country. But those differences is kind of what brought, for me, Canada as a whole. So then, when we sit back and we think of the problems that we're facing today, the problems have grown out of 150 plus years of negotiation, if you will. And most of you that are well aware of the history of Canada, that's what Canada was founded on, was on this negotiation. And for Alberta and Saskatchewan, we did our negotiation, if that's what you call it, in 1905. And it wasn't a negotiation. It was basically an equiproportionate dividing of the remaining territories. Why? For immigration, for the rail. Okay? So when you look at these problems, all of them, most of them, I would say, if not all of them, stem from one point and one point only, and that's the economic determination. When Alberta and Saskatchewan were created in 1905, there was no way at that time policymakers in Ottawa could even have fathomed the economic power that these two provinces have come out to be. And so when we look at these problems, whether it's RCMP, whether it's pension, equalization, I mean, we can go on for days and months and years discussing and fighting and seeing how they would be. But I guess the true correction, if you will, in my mind, is not separation, because as John correctly pointed out, if we separate, then we isolate. And as an isolation in terms of our land, we can't do anything. Again, we see it right now. BC does not want your pipeline, you're not getting a pipeline. Ottawa doesn't want to see your pipeline, you're not going to get a pipeline. Okay? And so the point is that what we've been doing as Albertans and from Saskatchewan is we've been busy building our economies, we've been busy building our communities. But what we need to do is we need to go back right to the core, right to the Constitution. And if you sit down and you read the 1905 Acts, you read the Constitution, the guarantee is in there. It states every province has the rights, the same rights as the Confederation provinces, the first, the original. And if you look at Alberta, Saskatchewan, we do not have those rights. We never had those rights. So what I think is important for us to do as the panel moves forward and listens to everybody, I think one of the biggest things that they should really be looking at too is the renegotiation of those rights. And when I say renegotiation of those rights, that includes the land masses. So, which means is our boundaries are not locked in stone. They were given to us. And so again, when we look at all these problems, what I'm hearing is we're seeing all these problems, we're trying to solve it in this box. But the problem is the box is the problem. And so what we need to do is start broadening our solution base, if you will, and start looking at solutions outside the box. It's not about being like Quebec. It's not about being like Ottawa. It's not about us saying, well, we'll just go it alone. You can go it alone. But where are you going to get the money from? Where are you going to send your resources? As John pointed out, you're going to send it to Montana until the next Democrat president comes in and says no? We're going to send it through BC. If BC and Saskatchewan, and even Manitoba at that point, are a separate country and they say no, what are you going to do? So you look, what I would appeal to everybody is to look around the world at any sort of landlocked state and you're still negotiating. In fact, you're at a worse position because you have nothing to negotiate with. They just say yes or no. So, you know, I can continue to encourage the discussion, but once again, I guess my advice to the panel would be, you know, don't be so narrow. It's not going to be pension that's going to correct 150 years of wrong. It's not going to be, you know, we're going to separate if you don't listen to us. You know, I'm not a separatist. You know, I've been across the country. I think Canada as a whole has demonstrated over the last 150 years it's much better as a whole rather than separate units. I completely agree with the wrongs that have been done, but you know, we need to look at the problem and we need to be a little bit more assertive in terms of renegotiating, not redefining Alberta's place, but redefining the whole, even the whole western base. Like, what are we looking at? Okay? So again, I thank the panel for its work, and I really encourage them to really broaden the perspective. Like, don't just be narrowly defined. Thank you.
Okay, there's still some time. Yes, if anyone would like to share a story of how this is impacting you, your family, your business, come on up to the mic. We'd love to hear from you. Okay, so the panel here will be around if you'd like to talk one-on-one. In just a second, I'll just hand it over to your MLA for closing remarks. With your package, you had a green slip there. Please fill it out. This is going to go directly to the panel. So if you didn't want to get up and speak, we'd still love to hear your input from that. We'll pass it over.
Thank you so much for coming out and joining us on a cold Saturday morning and coming through the snow. Thank you so much, Stephen and Donna, for being here. I don't know if you know this, there's been panels that have been going on throughout the province. Of course, you know that these folks have been traveling everywhere to collect this data. Can we give them a round of applause for their work? It's really incredible. Graham, thank you so much for all your comments too. We really appreciate it. And please don't be, if there's any discussions that need to happen now, we're all going to be here for at least the next 20 minutes so we can chat with you. But as Donna and Stephen were both saying, this is really about you. And we're not trying to direct the conversation. It's actually really, really important for us to hear from you. So thank you so much. It's, as always, such an honor. Thanks for meeting us in Cheadle. This is pretty much smack dab in the middle of this riding. So we really, really appreciate everybody who traveled to be here. And thank you to our volunteers and to Vicki for setting this up. We're very, very grateful. And have a wonderful rest of your afternoon. And we'll be here for a bit. So please come see us.